Yes. I know I'm dancing at the back. I know I'm always dancing at the back. Thank you, Sham. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you? Hello from India.
I know. And I'm hello to all our guests. I'm from Singapore, right?
You're still there.
I am still here, yes. And no, and I hear you've been having a lovely time in India.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, Mother and I have been up to our shenanigans here in India, but that's another conversation for another day. It's been interesting. It's been a bit of a challenge. Um, but at the same time, a lot of learning and growth, right? In terms of not just new skills, but realizations around, things that we may have taken for granted. But enough of that. Today we have got something different for our show. So,
Before you
for
start off with
you,
something different, wait, let me just tell all our audience who've always been supporting us since 2022.
Mhm.
All right, welcome
Mm.
to Leadership in Flow Asia Season 3. Yes, we are into Season 3. So the guys who have locked in the first time are wondering what this show is about. This show is a conversation that we have with different guests, different type of leaders in Asia. And what we're trying to unearth is what are the strategies, what are the tactics that they put in place for their personal growth, for their
Mm.
leadership growth, and their business growth. And that's been the formula for the show this week, the last 3 years. And
Mm.
this year, you have decided to do something very different where we talk about topics that matter. And you came up with this very creative idea for today. And please share with us what is today about.
Okay. So yeah, it's the theme for this year, as you came up with that idea, topics that matter, rather than themes. And the other thing that we decided that we'll do differently for season three is that we will have we'll introduce different modes, or rather than just interviews, right? Or different kinds of interviews. So today is a different kind of interview. We're going to do a book summary, and Ashok's going to take us off on the first book summary, and he's chosen his favorite book. He's been talking about this book forever, right? For the last, I think last year, all we heard was Satya Nadella's book, right? So we said, okay, since you have such a close affinity for that book, or it resonated such with you, let's talk about it. So we're going to explore Hit Refresh. That's the book. Hit Refresh for Today's Leader. That's the topic for today. And it's based off Satya Nadella's book titled Hit Refresh. So, Ashok, let me get the ball rolling. Let's go with, what were the things that jumped out at you when you first took that book up and you read it from, cover to cover, right? What were the things that jumped up for you? Look at him,
Oh,
his face, excited.
well, before I answer the question, I got two things to say. Number one is this is the book that we're talking about. Satya Nadella's Hit Refresh.
Oh.
Okay, so a little bit of context first. A little bit of context. Yeah. This is back in 2013. I was looking at December. Actually, I do remember 2013 December.
Mhm.
BBC was talking about the 10 worst CEOs in the world and all of that at that point of time. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, Steve Ballmer, Microsoft CEO, was part of that list. Very unfortunate, for whatever reasons. Here, it's not fair to him. I mean, that, some people call it the lost 10 years.
Mm.
But then again, in 2014, February is when they announced that Satya Nadella is going to be the CEO. So I got my interest peaked, like, okay, he's a third CEO. All right, that's all right. And then I heard his speeches, his announcements, and I realized that this guy is a bit different. There's something about him.
Mm.
He focuses a lot on humanity, you know. So that
Mm.
became my search to know a little bit more about him. And then lo and behold, when I walked into a bookshop one day, and I'm a sucker for books, right? I saw that Satya Nadella's book. I said, hey, I've not seen this as a New York bestseller or whatever. That's good. It's quiet. It's quietly sitting in the
Mm.
corner, right? And that's so
Mm.
much like him, So I said, okay, let's pick this up. I want to know a little bit more about this man. Yeah. So that's the context of why I got interested in wanting to know him. What was he different? What is he doing differently? Yeah.
Mm.
Now,
Mm.
let's fast forward now
Mm.
10 years. 10 years,
Okay.
right? So let's look at the report book of Satya Nadella for what he has delivered from a business point of view. Yep. So when he took over Microsoft, they were probably market capitalization was about 300 billion. Okay. Today, I think in February I was reading, it's about 3 trillion. I have
Mm.
no idea how many zeros there, but and they've
Mm.
also beaten right Apple, who are standing at 2.9 trillion or something. So they've beaten Apple, right?
Mm.
So from a
Mm.
report book, it's interesting.
Yep.
He's met all the markers, right? In
Mm.
fact, from the stocks, right, has soared more than 1,000% since 2014 compared to the other S&P companies, which has on the average about 185% kind of growth. Yep.
Oh,
So
wow. Mm.
he's so if you look at what we normally measure,
Mm.
he's done it, right?
Mm.
He's done it.
Mm.
Yep. And then the question is, what did he do? And when I started reading this book many years ago, this is all brown still, right? The book.
Yeah.
And when I reflect back today, I'm looking at the business environment, the world that we are in today. There's more volatility, uncertainties, you know, and I see that this book is a perfect roadmap for how organizations can grow their business. It's a
Mm.
beautiful. I feel that he's given us a framework that we can follow.
Mm.
Yep.
Mm.
And that's what struck me, you know.
Mm.
I mean, when I read the book and when I reread it and when I'm looking at it again, so he's given us a roadmap, a framework for all of us to follow. Yep. So I'm just going to share with you a framework. So I like you all to imagine, right, a weighing scale with a pan, right? Not the weighing scale where you hold from the top, but you know, like a horizontal pan.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Something like that.
That
Okay.
horizontal pan with a fulcrum in the center.
Okay. Hang
Yeah.
on,
The
Ashok.
arms.
I'm
Yeah.
going to change this into a different permutation so we can see you a little bit better. Okay, and move you this side. Okay,
Yeah.
now
Okay.
you do your weighing scale. All right.
So I like everyone here to imagine a weighing scale, but
Mm.
the kind with a pan, you know.
Mm.
So with
Mm.
the
Sure. Sure.
fulcrum, right, in the center,
Mm-hmm.
with the pan
Mm.
this way, right, with the arm
Mm-hmm.
sticking out, right,
Okay.
weighing scale. So there are two areas that I'm looking at, and why did I come up with this imagery? So when I was reading his book and reflecting about what he has done in the last 10 years, Peter Drucker's statement came to my mind. His statement about culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm sure you would have heard about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to argue about that statement and we're not going to go into debate, but I'd just like to take two important components from there: strategy and culture.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I've seen, what's jumped out at me, right, reading the book and reflecting, is that Satya Nadella focused on both. He focused on the
Mm.
strategy. It's a balance between the strategy and the culture. And what was interesting, right, is the fulcrum that was in the center to me that
Mm.
represented or that represents the values, the value, yeah, and the value that he's a big fan about. He keeps talking about it is empathy. So empathy is
Mm.
a fulcrum that holds a balance of strategy and culture, and then you got the arms that hold the pan together, and those arms are your principles. What are
Mm.
the principles for strategy? What are the principles
Mm.
for culture? So that's the
Mm.
way I saw it. I mean, there's an imagery that struck to mind when I was reading his book and, you know, looking at 10 years from now, 10 years since what he has done. Yeah. So I just want to give
Okay.
you a context about my excitement about that book and
Yes.
the imagery.
Yeah. Yeah. In case people can't hear it in your voice, they can see it, in how you're doing, how you're describing it. And that's such a wonderful metaphor that you have created, that you've got the two, the two sides of the pan,
Mhm.
right? And then you've got the fulcrum, and then you have the principles, right? The
Yeah.
fulcrum right in the middle, and then the principles that
Mhm.
govern the two.
That's
Um,
right.
so let's talk about each of these pieces, right? Let's
Nice.
talk about the two parts, the fulcrum and also the principles. Which would you like to start first with,
Let's talk about the
Ashok?
pants. Sure. You want
Uh-huh.
to do an
Okay.
overview of the pants, and then you can guide me through, because
Okay.
I'll just go on and on and on and on.
Yes, I know. I'm aware. So which one would you like to start
All right.
first
So
with?
let's talk
Which
about
pen?
strategy. Okay.
Mm,
Let's talk
mm,
about strategy. Okay. So again, the value, right? I must say the value is extremely important for both. So, like what you were saying, the value is empathy. So that we are very clear. Yeah. Empathy is a value that drives both. Are we good with
mm,
that so far? Okay. So then let's look at strategy. So when you looked at strategy, what was very clear is to focus, the principles were to focus on the human experience, being customer centric.
okay.
That was extremely important, right? And it stems from the empathy, right? Now, in the strategy, it is very, very interesting. He he was looking at trends even before he became the CEO, right? So he saw trends way ahead.
Mm,
He saw trends like AI, right? Mixed
mm,
reality, cloud computing. And he said, you know what? We need to move away from being a PC centric business to more cloud computing type of business, and saw trends in AI and mixed reality, for example, right? And
mm,
that's where he
mm,
started
mm,
focusing a lot more of the attention on. Right? That was very interesting. And together with that, right? In the past, Microsoft was quite closed in the sense where all their codings and all that is not really shared in the open community, right? Open source community.
mm,
But when he came on board, he said, we will work with open source communities. We will make it all open. We'll start working with everyone, you know? So because he
mm.
always saw the importance of collaborating, even with your competitors in the sense, it doesn't matter because there will be ideas that will spark, you know? So that was one thing about strategy that he was pretty clear about. Yep.
Mm,
Let's look at the
mm,
trends. So to me, when I look at the framework again, let's look at the trends, understand the trends. But again, the focal point of the principles is focus on human experience, and then look at what will impact them. If you put the customers in the center, you will see what will
mm,
impact them, and then identify those trends and then work on that, work towards that, and also
mm,
embrace your competitors in that sense. Yep. And one very good quote he gave, even in his when he's I think his first public address, right, press address and all that, right, and it's also written in the book. He says, "Our industry does not respect tradition; it only respects
mm,
innovation."
mm,
Mm. Yeah.
mm. That's interesting. Okay, I was going to ask something similar, right? The question, and you
Okay.
answered it
Okay.
by giving that quote that you said that our
Mm.
industry does not respect tradition; it only respects innovation, right?
Mm.
And it was related to what you said that he moved from keeping everything, confidential and within the confines of Microsoft to open source, right? So
Mm.
that meant two things, right? It meant that we had to, one, be we need to now share with others, and we need to also then take from others, right? In order to
Mm.
take from others, we need to also share, whichever way, whichever comes first,
Mm.
right? That must have been a major shift. I mean, not must have. It is a major shift for an organization like Microsoft, right? And we've
Yeah,
always done it this way, and we've always done it this way, and we've always been successful, right?
that's
And
right.
for a blip, how does the book say, or does it talk about what were the hurdles, but more importantly, how he overcame some of those that thinking internally about it's a shift, right? It's a mindset
Yeah,
shift, right?
yeah, it is. It is.
Mm,
Okay, to be fair, I mean, I read the book some time back, and I don't think he goes into depth about that, or what were the
mm,
hurdles or so. But I think a lot of the clues from there comes
mm,
from the value he holds and the culture that he spread. I, I,
spread.
I
Okay.
think I think that's where the answers would be, because he didn't go specifically into what are the pushbacks and all that,
Uh-huh.
but it's
Okay.
more about the culture that he started off and the value that he holds. And the
Okay.
value is very, very important. Empathy, right? It holds both
Right.
pants, right? That's
Yep.
extremely
All right.
important.
Okay, before we get into that, right,
Sure.
and we're going into culture, because there's also something else that you said around the fact that keeping the human in the center of any interaction or any decision that we make. Let's just talk a little bit more about strategy.
Mhm.
And the question I have in mind is that, you know, whose portfolio is strategy? I mean, is it the CEOs, the top management, or is it something that we need to think about differently? I mean, that's kind of where we traditionally think, right? Strategy is C-suite. C-suite decides strategy. We're all of us, the others, we implement it. Um, what do you see? What does the book
Okay.
say,
So,
or what
okay.
does he?
Again, the book doesn't separate out that way. Yeah.
Mm,
But what I'm gathering is there has been engagement with different groups of people. And
mm,
this is my personal opinion. I believe if I look at what are accountability and responsibilities, right? If I differentiate it very clearly that
mm,
way,
mm,
then
mm.
to me is the strategies, at the end of the day, who's accountable for the strategies are still the senior C-suite people. But does it
Okay.
mean that they cannot engage different groups of people in that discussions? I believe
Mm,
you can. And I've seen
mm,
organizations that engage, whether it's your middle managers or C-suite managers, or
mm,
even some of the individual contributors. I believe when you engage them in also getting ideas, right?
mm,
And that's
mm,
important, right? That's
mm.
important. So at the end of the day, it's about accountability. Right? There are two
Okay.
things I always look at is responsibility and accountability. Who's finally
How do you
accountable? Right?
accountable? How do you
Right.
differentiate accountability and
Okay, so
responsibility, Ashok?
in any task that is given, let's look at projects that they are given. I'm just going to boil it
Okay.
down to an easy way. Okay, the
Uh-huh.
projects. So you are running a
All right.
project. So then my question would be, if I draw a chart, right, to be very, very clear, I'll draw a chart to say,
Mm,
okay, who is at the end of the day the person who will make the final decisions and responsible for the success of this? More often, it's just one person, right? So that
mm,
person is going to be accountable. Now, who's responsible will be in this project. There could be various tasks that you need to do, right?
mm,
It could be
mm,
allying with certain vendors or grouping different people up together, maybe coming out with certain communication
mm,
plans, whatever the different tasks in a plan. And
mm.
the people who drive different tasks or run with different tasks, they are responsible for that.
Okay, got you.
Okay, so that's the
Okay.
responsibilities and
Mhm.
accountability. Someone, the buck stops here. The final decision
Mm,
maker,
mm, mm,
the one
mm,
who is
mm,
ensuring the success. That's accountability, and then you got
mm,
responsibility, right?
mm.
But if I'm
Okay.
to again expand that, right,
Mm,
in a lot of project management or in fact in clarity of roles, right? There is two other things that we do is actually consulted and informed. What I mean by consulted is when you're doing a project, right? Right? There's a certain group of people with subject matter expertise. You might go
mm,
to them and consult them with their
mm,
experience, right?
mm, mm,
Informed is in a project, again, there are groups of people who could be affected by this implementation of this plan. So
mm.
who should be informed? They may not be directly involved, but they need to be informed, right? So I just want to give a little bit more context to this principle of how to differentiate very specific people to tasks, right? And that way you can hold people accountable, responsible, and have the right conversations around it, right? This came from
That's nice.
Nokia.
I think
Actually,
that's
it's called
interesting.
RACI model, the RACI.
Mm,
Yep. Okay. So I
mm.
mean, I digress. I digress. Actually, I digress.
I know you got really passionate about this thing, and it's coming out in all that explanation that you're giving.
Okay.
But we're here to talk a little bit more about hit refresh rather than what
Okay. That's right. That's
and
right.
Microsoft, right?
Okay.
So I think now it's good for us to kind of, and I like the way you looked at you define accountability and responsibility. I don't think we have considered that nuance, right? We sometimes use those two words interchangeably. But yes, I can see how how it's of value, especially when you're looking at where does the buck stop. So I'm a leader, I'm a manager of a team, and the buck stops with me, but the others are responsible for the various roles and functions that they have, and then the buck stops with them in terms of their role and function, right?
Yeah.
Their role, the tasks that they're supposed to do.
That's
But
right.
overall, I, as a leader, am in charge. So that's
Yep.
an interesting and useful way to think about accountability and responsibility. Thanks for that.
No worries.
Okay. So if we come down to the middle, the fulcrum,
Yes, the
right? And
fulcrum.
the fulcrum is empathy.
Mm.
How is empathy seen and heard in Microsoft under Nadella's watch? What were things that either shifted? It was like this before. Now it's like this, right? How's it? How's empathy? What's the walk and talk of empathy?
Oh, wow.
In Microsoft. Yeah.
Okay. I think I say wow because reading the book is one thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
He and looking at and reading up a lot of press conferences thereafter. In fact, recently also, right? He makes it very clear, right? Empathy is not a soft skill; it's actually a very
Hmm.
hard skill. It's very
Hmm.
hard. All right, so he addresses it. It's not easy at all. Huh? It's not easy. It's not a soft skill.
Hmm.
And he does say in a very recent interview 2 months ago, he said it's a hard skill, but it's an important skill because it helps us understand people better. So
Hmm.
even from a customer's point of view, if one of the things I've read in the book and I've heard him say many times or read, he says we need to identify customers' unmet or unarticulated needs. That takes a deep level of empathy,
Hmm. Hmm.
very deep level of empathy to be able to be customer obsessed, to identify their unmet or unarticulated needs. So that is from a customer point of view, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
from an organizational culture point of view, right? He has said one of the most important things is for managers to be able to develop people. So one of the things he's introduced is managers to be equipped with the coaching abilities. And again, the reason for this is empathy, to bring out the best in people, right?
Hmm.
So empathy is a very important component in his. In fact, it comes out in the book very strongly, or in many, many, many a times, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he
I could
holds on to it very strongly.
strongly. I've two questions, right, to ask you. So, I mean, from a very hard nosed, brazen, way. I would say, obviously, lah, I mean, you're in business, right? So obviously, you need to put yourself in the customer's shoe because how are you going to get to that trillions if you're not in the customer's shoe, right? So, duh, it's an obvious thing. Yeah. He, however, what I want to draw on is this part about the connection between empathy and coaching. How did he correlate? How did he correlate that we need that coaching will drive empathy? Right.
Okay.
That's one question. Maybe we tackle that question first before I
Okay.
ask you the
Okay.
next question.
So again, I have my little disclaimer, right?
Mm,
I'm giving you my voice around this, right? The things he has
mm,
done, right?
mm,
So he's definitely a big believer in leadership modeling. So it
mm.
starts from there.
Okay.
So all of that is a principle. Remember, I talked about the arm, right? That holds
Mm,
culture. The
mm.
principle that holds culture is really about leadership modeling. Now, he
Okay.
has said it very clearly, right? Leaders need to focus on creating a lot of energy, right?
Mm,
and give clarity. So the two important things, energy and clarity. Okay. So let's look at what he has done. Then I'll answer the question as we come along. Right.
mm,
So he said, you know what? We need to lead with a sense of purpose and pride in what we do. So there's two things. We got to lead with a sense of purpose and pride in what we do. So he went back and really looked at what is Microsoft all about, what we set out to do, what was our real mission, what is the difference we wanted to make, right? So yeah, this exercise took some time and gathering a lot of feedback from a lot of people and all. And the first important thing to align and to get the energy from people was to align everyone to a mission. And finally, they came to a mission. And if you look at Microsoft's mission, right, it is to empower every person and organization to achieve more, right? To empower. And he goes on to say in the book, right, we are in the empowerment business, right? And that is one way to energize everyone. So it's about alignment. So if one key thing, right, while you're looking at leadership modeling for culture, one way to ensure that everyone is aligned to the culture is to give everyone that high energy sense of purpose. This instance is about empowering people. Right? Then he says something very, very interesting, you know. He says we need to help people realize their personal passion and use Microsoft as a platform to pursue that passion. Can you imagine that, Sean? A lot of people are saying, oh, you come to this organization, this is a platform, right? You come to this organization, you get the salary, you do your work, you measure your KPI, you know. But he's saying, you know what? You got a passion, right? You got your passion. Can Microsoft help you to pursue that passion? And that's where the coaching part comes in. Do you see now? Right? So the empathy portion is very important to helping people discover their passion and use Microsoft as that platform, right?
To make a difference.
Yeah, that's right. Pursue that passion. You see? So
Okay,
that's where
that was very clearly said. I mean, and then it makes sense, right? Because what he did was go back to basics.
yes,
Right?
absolutely
You go
right.
back to basics, right?
No, it is
You
right.
go
Yeah.
back to the reason, the purpose that this organization was formed. What was the vision? What was the idea? How was it that it was thinking of making a difference in the world? Right? Revisit that, because I mean, there was Bill Gates, there was
Steve
Ballmer, and
Ballmer.
then
Yep.
yeah, right. There's Ballmer, and then that's Nadella, right? And there was a little bit. I mean, but always a transition. The person who takes on a transition from a very key, prominent CEO or owner, it's a difficult act to follow. I mean, GE had the same issue as well, right? When the person took over from.
Jack Walsh.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Forgot the name. Right. See, in a different space, forget name. In India,
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It happens. It happens.
yeah, different space doing different things, right? But what he did was let's go back to the core of it. Why were we set up in the first place? Where is Microsoft? Has it evolved? What's that evolution of how we make that difference? And then making that connection to each individual
Yeah.
and saying, okay, individual, Ashok, you're joining us. How do you want to make a difference, and how can Microsoft help it to do it? And you said it right. It's always the other way around. This is our organization, and you individual, you're coming here. This is how you can achieve what you're going to do, right? But whereas it seems similar, but it's actually not, right?
Yeah.
It's here.
Yeah.
He's looking at, as an organization, how can we help you make the difference that you want to make in your world or in this
That's
world?
right. That's
Yeah.
right. And,
Right.
and,
So,
and that's a lovely summary, Sham, because you're right to say sometimes we need to take the two steps back and revisit our past. Nothing wrong with tradition to some level, because tradition also gives us story, right? And tradition also helps us understand where we have made an impact to be able to, for us to catapult to the future. you know.
Mm,
So I think
mm,
that was good. Where when you summarize it, sometimes we got to go back to basic, and that's what he talked about his book also, because he recognized that people were passionate in Microsoft.
mm,
They want to
mm,
make a difference, and and he went back to look at all those old stories, collated it together, as a group and all that.
mm,
And this is something that we have always advised organizations, right, Sean,
mm.
to never forget the stories that brought them there also.
Yeah,
But again, it's that how do you now pivot to the future also, and not just hold on
correct.
to traditions, right? So it's a mixture
Traditions.
of
Yeah,
both.
yeah,
So
correct, correct.
the traditions will tell you how we are making an impact, and that can energize you for a mission. And then
Yeah,
you create a platform for people to bring their best versions in there. Quoting
yeah.
your language, best version.
That's true. And I like I mean, it's interesting that you use the word traditions
Mm.
because it's a word that triggers people in extremes, right? People either
Yep.
triggered positively or they triggered negatively, and I'm always trying to look at it from a middle ground. I mean, right? And traditions. Let's just talk a little bit about that.
Mm.
Traditions were there because they're stories, and the
Mm.
traditions are stories that came about because of what the environment was at that point in time, right?
Absolutely
So
right.
yeah, and
Mm.
it could be that the tradition or remains because the environment hasn't changed. It's still valid.
Could be. Could be.
Or it could be that we need to tweak it because the
Yep.
environment has changed a little bit. Or it could also be that we need to get rid of it because the environment does not exist at all anymore. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we need to create new traditions, right? New
That's right.
stories because the environment has changed, right?
That's right.
So yeah, that's just kind of putting things in
Yeah, it's
perspective.
true. It's a balance. It's always a balance, right?
Yeah, 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 there you go. Um, which brings me to my next question. We all know that Nadella had a child, a son, who was physically disabled, right? And he lost his son recently, right?
2 years back. Yeah.
2 years back. Yeah, and it's not something that any any parent should go through. Um, Having said that, he lived with his son for 26 years or
Mm.
so, right? Could that experience be the reason what's driving his direction in empathy? Living with a child with severe physical disabilities and being a parent to that child, could it be that's the reason why he has that special, special magic power, superpower that told him that's the direction that I need to go
Yeah.
because I've got this experience in my
Sure.
personal life.
Sure.
Hmm.
It's a good question because I think most of us might assume that is the reason that got him to be more
Hmm.
empathetic.
Hmm.
But when I read the book, I realize there are different levels and influences. So to
Hmm.
answer the question immediately, I don't think so. But let me explain why first. Right?
Hmm.
It's just like us. When we experience life in different ways, there are different influences, whether it's people, circumstances, and then we formulate what is important for us. Right?
Hmm.
So the first time, I mean, I suspect his mother also had an influence on him, but in the book he talks about the first time he cognitively was told about empathy was in his job interview when he wanted to enter Microsoft. Can you imagine that? Let me explain the story. So what happened was he applied for a job, and as you know, as a coder in a tech firm and all, right? You are tested on different algorithms and permutation and situations and all. So he was doing
Hmm.
all of that, right? So the hiring person then asked him a question. He said, "Now you are at a crossroad, and a child
Hmm.
falls. What will you do?" So Satya was going like, okay, the algorithms have not taught me this. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Then he answered cognitively what came to his mind. He said, I will call 911. You know, then the hiring manager said, you know what? If a child falls, the first thing you need to do is carry the child and hug the child. You can call 911 after
Hmm.
that. you need to have more empathy. And that's what the hiring manager told him, you know. So that was his first exposure, at least in the book it is written in that way, right? Where if I look at it, it is cognitively he was told to him. But you know how it is for even for all of us, right? We can understand certain things at a cognitive level, but it's the experiential level that's when we actually embrace and understand what it really means.
Correct.
And yes,
Correct.
and it is his son's situation that helped him see empathy and understood empathy at the experiential level, at the human level. And in his book also, he does talk about in the early part, he was feeling sorry for himself. He was angry. You know the different emotions we
Yeah.
go through,
Yeah.
right? And then he realized that no, this is not helping his son. He has to be there for his son, right? Then the empathy grew in understanding what his sons require, what his family require, what his wife requires, you know. And then when he started looking at all the equipment in the hospital that is also helping support the son, then he realized, hey, you know what? Microsoft is also here helping. So he could connect back. So to me, I think the empathy part in the book also he talks about his interview, but I believe his son, the situation, the experience with his son, would have taken it at a much deeper level. At a much deeper level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's thank you. It's one of the ways that we do not want to learn anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing
That's
through
true. That's
something.
true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So let's move on.
Sure.
So we've done the two plates. We've
Yep.
done the fulcrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've done the fulcrum, and oh my god, that's such a long time since I've used that word fulcrum. Okay, and then you said there's the principles that drive it,
Mm.
right? And they hold it all together. So where would you like to take the discussion next,
Okay.
Ashok?
I,
Where would
I
you like to?
want to talk about one more thing in leadership modeling that he has done, right? It's very close to empathy and it's also very close to the coaching part of things, right? So he always talked about you need to energize the people, this one, and he says about clarity, transparency and clarity, right? It's very, very important, right? Now, what is very interesting in the book, and this one also touched me because he said, or at least I read in different articles thereafter also, his senior leader executive team, right? He brought them together, right, and gave them a book. Why did he give them that particular book? I'll show you the book soon, right? It's because at that point of
You have
time,
that
right?
book at two.
Uh,
You have that book too. Okay.
because I read this many, many, many years ago, so it's also brown, right?
Mm,
Okay, so the reason for that is because Microsoft was known for a culture of hostility, infighting, backstabbing at some point in time.
right.
So this is again the culture shift, right? Remember we talked about leadership modeling is a principle, right? Aligning everyone and leadership need to energize everyone and give clear, transparent communication, right? And one of the things he gave was this book called if you can see this, Non-Violent Communication,
Okay.
right?
Language for life.
By Marshall Rosenberg, right?
Okay.
Again, so the book says I read this I think in 2004, I think 2006 or 2005. I read this many. I don't know, 2005 or 2006 is when I first read this book, right? So I'm a big fan of this book also, right? So when he gave this book out to everyone because this is one book that touched him at a deeper level because this is about conversations that you have. He wanted the leaders to start understanding how to hold the right type of conversations. I could understand because when you do read this book, Sham, and everyone who's logged in, I would definitely recommend this nonviolent communication, right? And when you go deeper into it, you understand something that you know what all of us have been taught the science of communication, but we've hardly been taught the art of conversations, understanding not only words, because sometimes we automatically use a lot of judgmental type of words, and even in this book, it talks a lot about deep empathy and understanding people, you know, and how to share your feelings, your needs to people, and also listening and understanding their needs, their
Mm,
feelings.
mm,
So that's what this book is all about, and it gives its own frameworks on how to do it. And he gave this book to everyone, his executive leadership, right?
mm,
Because he wanted to break that that type of hostility and infighting, because he believed that yes, there can be difference of opinions, but how do we come to a shared purpose and alignment is by sharing those ideas, in a
mm,
respectful manner, in a safe manner. So if you
mm,
think about it, right, without him talking about this in the book, in many ways, he was trying to create a psychologically safe environment.
mm,
And it starts from the top so that it can be cascaded down,
mm.
right? So
Okay.
it's a very important skill that he felt that was important for leaders. So
Mm,
there are leadership principles, but he felt that this was an important skill, right?
okay.
The way they hold
So,
conversation. So I just loved it. Yeah.
sorry. So
No
it's a
worries, man.
skill. It's a skill of having respectful,
Conversations. I mean, yeah, that's,
safe conversations, right?
oh, that's
So
nice. Safe conversations.
yeah,
Yes.
respectful, safe conversations. And when we
Mm-hmm.
say safe, it's that you're able to voice a different opinion, and not have it perhaps trampled on, right? So from
Yeah.
that book, what were some things? So we're kind of segueing into another book. But
Oh, does it
what
mean you
were
want
the
me to do
things?
this book next month?
We'll see, we'll see. But just from what you understand from Hit Refresh, right?
Mm,
And given that you have read that book on nonviolent communication, what
mhm.
elements do you think? I'm still going to connect the dots in
Sure,
that sense.
sure.
What elements do you think that Nadella, and I know I'm asking you to make a
Mm,
judgment call, but
mm.
from your personal opinion, what do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think he had taken from that book, like the core thing core skill or idea that he had taken from
Mm,
that book, or ideas that he implemented at Microsoft.
sure. Um, to me, I would suspect it's three things.
Mm,
One is definitely about listening,
mm, mhm,
right? Definitely, it's all about listening, right? Understanding the power of words,
mm,
and the most important thing is empathy. I know I'm coming
mm,
back to empathy because even in the
mm,
book, right,
mm,
this other book, nonviolent
mm,
communication, Marshall Rosenberg also talks about empathy, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
he even goes on to say empathy, the difference between empathy and sympathy, don't, and he makes a very clear distinction. He says, Marshall Rosenberg, that is, he talks about, don't say I understand. That doesn't mean that you empathize.
mm,
Demonstrate the understanding.
mm. Yep.
Demonstrate it. Don't just say it. Demonstrate it.
Mm, mm,
So it goes at a very deep level of empathy. So the three things that to me that struck me, and I won't be surprised that for Nadella, it's about the empathy, and it's
mm,
about the listening part, because he's
mm,
a big in his book and different interviews also, it comes out a lot. It's about the listening. you know and to me, one of the things that struck out in the book was about the power of the words that you use,
mm,
right? Because
mm,
in
mm,
Marshall Rosenberg, he does allude to the fact that we tend to use words sometimes without really thinking very clearly, and it could have an impact in terms of judgments that we may have,
no,
or certain labels that we may come up with very quickly,
mm,
you know.
mm, mm,
So it's a clarity about that, It's not to put blame on other people, because those words, those labels could be seen as violent. So that's the meaning of non-violent communication, right? Don't be violent and put people in a closed area. You need to make them feel safe. So this is what I would suspect that struck a big chord in him, meaning Satya Nadella. I suspect.
okay, okay, great. Thank you. um I think that, as we know, right, And as he said, empathy is not a soft skill; it is a
It's
hard
not.
skill, right? And part of empathy is the ability to listen, which is also a hard skill, right? Apparently not something that is easy to develop, given the fact that we are hearing a lot about listening and your ability to listen and listen well, right? Not
Mm.
perfunctorily listening, but listening well in order to be able to give value in your response or to help that person out of a certain state that you're in or a certain situation that you're in.
Yeah.
So it comes with a lot of empathy in itself, comes with a lot of secondary ecosystem of skills that you need to build in order to be
Mm.
able to empathize, all right, or to demonstrate empathy or to feel empathy, right? So there's two things, right? Being able to feel it, or being able to demonstrate it, but do you feel it? But we'll go that's a different conversation
Yeah.
altogether.
That's,
All right,
you know
let's
what?
not
That
go
could be a
there.
topic that matter.
Yeah. It could be. It could be.
Mm.
I want to go back to the scale, right? And I want
Yep.
to look at, go back to strategy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And why do I want to go back to strategy? Because I think now I mean, you and I we've been exchanging articles, and many of the articles, the McKinseys, the Gallups, right, come up with trends and patterns that we're seeing.
Mm,
So
mm,
it's not
mm.
just now in the McKinsey's world, in the Gallups world, it's also all throughout, right? We're seeing in even different institutions that are coming up with trends. Some trends overlap, some trends don't, some come up with new ones. But trends, what am I getting to? Trends seems to be the thing that we are focusing on, that leaders tend to be looking out for, that business tends to be looking and keeping an eye on at what are trends, right? So, how does an understanding of trends, right? And I don't know whether trends and patterns are the same. I'm not quite sure. I put a post recently about it.
Mm, mm, mm.
How does an understanding of trends help us define strategy? Did did Nadella talk a little anything about that or allude to anything in the book about his
No,
ideas?
not in that way. No, no.
Hmm. Hmm.
But again, if I'm to connect the dots and look at where he's coming from, right?
Hmm.
It's about customer centric, right? It's
Hmm.
it's it's looking at what people need, and he said it's a move away from PC centric to cloud computing because he says that's where the experience is. People are
Hmm.
mobile. That's where
Hmm.
the experience is. You know, so he's
Hmm.
looking at from a customer experience point of view.
Hmm.
So again, if you look at it, but trends and patterns. This is a good question. What is the difference from my reading? It's like okay, stock price, right? It has
Hmm.
trended up, so it has gone
Hmm.
up. So that is a trending upwards. But what are the patterns behind it? I don't know whether that could be
Hmm.
one way to differentiate it. You know, but it's a good question
Hmm.
for us to start thinking about between trends and patterns.
Hmm.
And I think again, I think it's about looking at customers first. Who are your customers? Being very clear about their experience, and looking at their what they want. What is their experience like?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
I think in his book or in some of his articles, he also talks about Steve Jobs, for example, where he saw design was very important.
Hmm.
Right, and that's the strength of Steve Jobs, right? So in this instance,
Hmm.
it's always about putting the customers in the center, the customer experience, and
Hmm.
looking at what do we need to do, what is their trends like, putting it yourself in their shoes and say, okay, what
Hmm.
can we do to help in their experience? How can we add
Hmm.
value to their experience? Right?
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
me, I would say that would be the approach, though he doesn't talk about it that way, but I'm just piecing it together,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
Right,
Yep. Yep.
when you
Yep.
talk about customer experience, you talk about the trends, what is important for the customers, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well, that's what a book summary is, right? We don't know what he was in his head when he wrote the book, or why he wrote it in
But this is
the
what
way
jumped
that
out
he
to
did.
me. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, and that's especially what a book summary is about.
Mm,
Okay, so so that's the strategy part, right? I'm kind
Mhm.
of getting us towards the kind of a close, right? Coming down to the culture, all right. So what are, if I were to ask you to summarize, what were lessons on culture building, right, through growth mindset? Because that's essentially what he was developing. I mean, there's so many models of growth mindset, but you're talking about growth. You're looking at not just what's here. I'm like
Mm.
opening and expanding
Sure, sure,
the
sure.
possibility of how to think about things, right? And from the
Mm.
nonviolent communication program to getting them to all the book, right? And then getting putting coaching in as a key strategy for the
Yes,
organization,
yes.
right? So what can we emulate from there? What can
Okay.
organizations emulate? But let's not go organization. What can leaders? What do the quiet leaders who tune into our program? What can we emulate from
Right.
those
It, it,
strategies?
it it's a good question again. The reason why, because it reminds me of what he said. The C in CEO stands,
Ah,
right?
okay.
He
Mm,
said it's culture. He said the CEO is
mm,
a curator of the culture. So that's a very important takeaway. The
mm,
CEO
mm,
is a curator of, I would say, the desired culture. So
mm,
so again, culture, as you know, Sham, right? It comes by design or by default.
mm,
Every team has a culture or organization, right?
mm,
But if
mm,
you have a very clear idea of what's the culture you're going to build, then you need to be able to curate it. So that's a C for CEO, curator of
mm,
culture.
mm,
Powerful. And with
mm,
that, right, is what he looked into. Yes, you're right to say he looked at the empathy part, leadership modeling. He looked at how people hold conversations and all. And there's another book that he also loves. As you can see, he's a very avid reader, which is
mm.
Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset,
Mindset. Mm.
right?
Okay.
And he saw that this is important. And in fact, in one of the articles, I even read that he gave that book to other groups of people. It looks like he giving books away,
Mm,
you know. So yes, the thing about growth mindset, he said, number one, we got to move away. This is a mantra that is comes out in the book a lot, and even
mm,
different articles. He said we need to move away from know it all to learn it all.
mm,
Okay, so
mm.
that's a parameter first.
Oh, I
From
love
move
that.
away, yeah, from move away from know it all, I know it
Mm,
all, to let's learn it all. And he said the way to do that is to be curious, obviously, right? To be
mm,
curious, and that is why the managers were taught to model, coach, and care to support their teams deploying
mm,
this growth mindset. So it
mm,
is about moving away from know it all to learn it all, right?
mm,
And I,
mm,
I this one I can't remember whether I read in the book or in another article about how he tried to make decision making easier by removing certain levels of protocols, so
Oh,
people could
okay.
make a bit more decisions. I can't remember whether it's from the book and an article because I keep reading both, So
Mm,
again, all of that is to support the growth mindset,
mm,
right? To support the
mm,
growth mindset about being curious, to embrace more and learn more, right? So move away from know it all to learn it all. Now, what I see, though he doesn't talk about this in the book in a big way, but what I foresee, right, is with this mindset and with
mm.
this culture that is supporting, Microsoft is now moving into another level,
Okay.
a learning organization,
Mm,
right? So again, in a very disruptive world that we have today, right? We can't just stick with the old tradition. Remember, he said we can't just stick with the old tradition. We need to look at innovation, and this is
mm,
a fantastic way to create innovation or improvements. With the growth mindset, because you're moving away
mm,
from know it all to learn it all. So this is
mm,
something that I foresee will be even more embedded. It'll come out, because people are being curious. They want to keep learning and learning and learning in that sense. So it's fantastic,
mm.
isn't it?
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see what Microsoft comes up with in the next 10 years, right? Or what's the next? So you've gone to the trillions.
Mm,
What's the next leap for them?
right.
Which would be interesting to witness and to also maybe navigate. Okay, we're coming towards the last few minutes of our show. So I'm going to ask you to do this for us, Ashok.
Uh-oh.
I know, no, or you know the book inside out.
Oh
So
no, I won't
if
say
I were
inside out
to ask,
lah. Oh, it's oops.
yeah, you know. So if I were to ask you, okay, this is your 1 minute question, huh? All
Oh
right,
my god.
from the book, right, or not from the book, from what you have, synthesized, you've read, you've analyzed, you've connected the dots. What are lessons we are missing for today's business? It's kind of like a summary of your book summary that you've done, right? So what perhaps would be the three things that you think are lessons that we are missing for today in today's businesses? They're kind of missing the plot.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. Uh, I think the first thing that came out to my head when you asked me the question is leaders need to have the courage, right? Leaders need to have the courage to stand by what they believe in.
Mm.
Because for Satya Nadella, it was the courage to hold by his values. So that's the second thing, right? You need to have a clarity of your values, right? And you need to have the courage to stay by your values in that sense, right?
Mm.
Because he even talked about in his book not to be envious of your competitors, but how can we learn from them, and if there's a shortcoming, how can you be thrilled about it and learn more, right? So it comes from being very clear about your values and having the courage to demonstrate that and live that, which goes to the third point, which we have always talked about in our show, which I'm coming out. To me, Satya Nadella is a very self-aware leader.
Mm.
Right? And that comes up very strongly, whether his exposure when he was young in India, his mother's exposure, and his different life exposures that he had. He's very self-aware about who he is, who he is not, what he can bring to the table, what he can do differently, And I think the self-awareness part is extremely important. It comes up very strongly in him, in the way he thinks, the way he responds with the right words, And he's not your rah-rah CEO, if you notice, he fits in our bill of a quiet leader, right? So
Mm.
these are three things that comes up for me. Be very clear about your values, have the courage to demonstrate it, right? And all of this only comes through when you are self-aware and self-confident about yourself. But it starts from being self-aware.
Very
Yeah.
nicely done, Mr.
Yeah.
Ashok.
Thank you,
Well
Sharon.
done.
You've been asking me a
I,
lot of very good questions. Now I got to go and do more research. I got to read more
no, I
books.
think, yeah, I think you've done more than enough research for this, not just with this book. So,
Mm.
so that brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of our first book summary, and led off none other by Ashok. So, Ashok, how was that? How did you feel about talking through your experience with the book?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love talking through it. I would love to keep talking about it and share with more and more people about this. But thank you for prompting me to do
You most
this,
welcome.
because what I did was I had to do a bit more research, right? And
Mm,
that's why I got the idea of the scales and all. And I must say, at the core, right,
mm,
hit refresh is not just about organizations. It's about us humans,
mm,
and
mm.
it's about refreshing ourselves. It's not just about organization. It's about hit refresh for ourselves, right? As a person, as a human, I would say that.
As an
Yeah,
individual. Okay. And
yeah.
on what better note can we end the show this week? Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Yeah, this is Shamini, who was dialing in from India, and
and Ashok dialing in from Singapore. Very
as
happy to
usual.
share with you. Hit refresh for today's leader for tomorrow's world from Satya
Yep.
Nadella. There's
Very
a book.
good.
There's a book.
Very good. And we'll be back next week. There you go. That's the book. That's the book in case you don't know which book to look at for. Um, we'll be back next week for our April run with a
Yes.
next guest to talk about interesting topics that matter to us in 2024. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening,
Thank
and
you
we'll
very
see
much,
you
everyone.
again.
Yeah.
Okay.
See
See
you.
you
Bye
again
bye. Have
next week.
fun.
Bye.
Bye bye.